Our theme this month is practical wisdom. And today's topic is love in deed. Normally you see that word written indeed, one word. Today it's in deed, two words. I was pleased to see several articles in the May edition of our Science of Mind magazine, this one, the current one, that addressed the topics that I chose for this month's talks. The Science of Mind magazine staff sets up their contributors, their article titles, and the various and ongoing quotes from Ernest Holmes many, many months before the actual publication, and it arrives at the post office in my post office box. And I don't do any of those things. As Gail Fujimoto can attest to, as she waits patiently each month for the theme and the topics from me, in time for her to prepare our music program for the coming month. So fortunately, though, I have the choice to do that so that these themes and topics are as current as possible, both from the standpoint of what's occurring in the world and from what's occurring in the lives of our members, friends, communities, state, and country. And though I don't always read all the articles in the magazine as soon as it arrives, I do read the daily guides each day, and the rest of the magazine as time permits, usually starting, though, with Dr. Andy Newberg's article on science and spirituality. So this month, as I have been working my way through the magazine, I discovered several articles that provided me with thoughts and ideas on today's talk, Love in Deed. We're all aware that there are a plethora of books, of programs, of lectures, of classes available daily on a worldwide scale in today's world about the concept of oneness. For the most part, though, they're esoteric. That is, they're often abstract, they're perplexing, they're arcane, or maybe even cryptic. And that suggests that they are intended for or likely to be understood by only a small number of people with a specialized knowledge or interest. Yet, indeed, love and our capacity to use this attribute of universal energy, love belongs to all humankind and is something that all of us can practice by giving and receiving it through our thoughts and our actions. That's just practical wisdom. Ernest Holmes described love as the self-givingness of the spirit through the desire of life to express itself. He reminds us that we are surrounded by this spirit of living intelligence. Its eternal givingness, its love, its goodness, its power, wishes to express itself through each one of us. So every act of human affection and love, of generous giving and receiving, of kind relations with others, is an extension of that spirit of life flowing through each one of us. Life is the great giver, and we are its distributor. The challenge in this, though, says Reverend Andrietta Earle, requires that we first recognize our own divinity. The key is to acknowledge that principle, to embrace that power within ourselves, and then live from our oneness in it. Well, how do we do that? Because how we do that individually propels us toward doing it as a family, as a neighborhood, as a community, and continuing to expand further out into the world. So why not start with the simple things? One of those examples happened to me a few days ago in the grocery store. I was driving my grocery cart down the aisle, and ahead of me was a family of 4 children, mother and 4 children of varying sizes, effectively blocking the aisle as they talked loudly about a product on the shelf. So I stopped, ready to wait for a moment or two, until one of them noticed me and made room for me to pass. Well, eventually one of them did. This tiny little girl, about this high, in a darling tiny shift dress. It would have been a muumuu if she'd been Hawaiian, but she wasn't, so it was, a shift. Broke away from that group and came running toward me with something in her hand, holding it like this. She stopped at the front of my grocery cart, and she climbed up on the bar in the front of it so she could hold on to the end of the grocery cart, and she flipped what was in her hand into my cart. Giant smile on her face. Didn't say a word, just flipped it in there. And then she giggled, and she stepped back down and ran back to her mother. I laughed out loud as the mother looked over at me because she was somewhat concerned. And as I took this box of Band-Aids, decorated with pictures of cartoon animals all over it, out of my grocery cart. When the mother saw what it was, she began to apologize. But as I handed it to her, I explained it was the best present I'd received all week long. And what a generous little girl she had. And one of the other girls popped up then and said, "And today's her birthday," and pointed to the little one. "So what is the birthday girl's name?" I said. "Sadie," her sister replied. But by then, Sadie was clear down at the far end of the aisle on the other side of the cross aisle, almost to the eggs, if you know the KTA store. So I waved to her, and I said loudly, "Sadie, happy birthday." And that just brought her right back down that aisle to my grocery cart, where she climbed back up on that little bar and with that same little giggle. Didn't even notice that the Band-Aids by then were no longer in the cart. So I thanked her for sharing her Band-Aids, told her that her mother had them now, so they could pay for them and take them home. So what a simple little heartwarming moment that was for me. And I think for Sadie, too. She was in a safe place with her sisters, her mother, and by then, incidentally, her father and baby brother, who had come around the corner in the grocery cart of theirs. She was in a safe place to share something that was hers without any hesitation with a total stranger. So sometimes it's the simple things, the so-called small things, that teach us these huge lessons about learning and showing our love, deed by deed. And when we start paying attention to them, it's easy for us to realize they're happening to us and by us all the time. Just like yesterday in the story we heard in Standing in the Light. Sometimes when those things happen, we look at the negative instead of the positive, and then guess what we get? The negative. In the case in the Standing in the Light story, it was all about the positive. And for me, this thing happening yesterday, or the other day, was the same. There's another message in this too, that underlies how each of us can change the world around us. And that is by being the change we aspire to see. That's about understanding ourselves better, which helps us to recognize that what we see in others, because we are what we see in others. So the better we become, the more better, or as we say in Hawaii, the mo better, we see around us. By the way, that encompasses both the law of attraction and the law of circulation. So now I want to share another story with you. This one is very different in some respects and very much the same in others. This particular story is from the Chicken Soup for the Soul of Hawaii. And it's titled, the section that it's in is titled Island Wisdom. Lilia Wahine Makai Hale is her full name. But she's known as Kupuna Hale. This feisty 89-year-old is called Manaleo, which means native speaker. Her first language is Hawaiian. In a culture based on oral traditions, Manaleo are the keepers of knowledge, and in a culture where life experience is considered a great teacher, Manaleo are the sources of wisdom. And in a culture where modern technology and Western thought are daily influences upon the lives of the Hawaiian people, Manaleo are the guardians of the traditions. Generations of Hawaiian people look up to these native speakers as their teachers and their protectors. One of the important lessons that Kupuna Hale learned from her kupuna, which was her grandfather, was the value of taking care of one another. The Hawaiian phrase for which is malama kekahi I kekahi. Kupuna Hale always finds time to help those who request her support. She will warmly say, "Come to my office, dear, and we'll talk about it." What do we call that here in Hawaii? Talk story. Her office, by the way, is a fast food restaurant in the charming little town of Waimanalo on the island of Oahu. Her business? Giving love, support, and wisdom to those who ask. In her countless hours of volunteer work with senior citizens and youth programs, Kupuna Hale became aware of a drastic measure to cut funding for a senior citizen hot lunch program. She understood the great good that was done by this program for the spirit as well as the body. So when she was invited to accompany a small group of people from the island to Washington, D.C. to support the mission of saving this program, she agreed at once. With her beloved ukulele tucked into her tote bag, Kupuna Hale arrived in Washington, D.C. As the entourage entered the main chamber of the Capitol, Kupuna Hale's heart began to beat a little bit faster. She realized that many of the faces that she had seen on television and in newspapers she was about to confront face to face. She got a little bit more nervous. She could see the entire room from where she sat. She thought, what do I tell these senators? How can I express to them what this program means to my people? The money needed to provide hot lunches for our elders in the years to come is so small, yet it will give back so much. How can I make these senators understand this philosophy of malama kekahi I kekahi? And what if I fail? The roll call began, and the senators started on their policy-making agenda. After the first member of the Hawaiian delegation was called, Kupuna Hale's name was called. She slowly got up from her chair. She didn't know any of these people personally, and now she was about to ask them for money to feed her people. What if they couldn't understand this Kapuna who lived thousands of miles away on a rock? How could she connect with them? Kapuna Hale looked out at this sea of faces and said, "We are not the young and restless. We are the bold and beautiful." The legislators stopped staring at their notepads and looked up. Some of them even smiled. As she continued, they were obviously taken with this vivacious grandmother, 87, as I said at the beginning of this story. So she continued with a twinkle in her eye. "Please add more zeros," she said, "to the amount you now have before you." Then Kapuna Myrtle Hilo stood and said, "I do not have the gift of gab, like Tutu Hale, but if I had an ukulele, I could explain how I feel." Kapuna Hale reached into her tote bag, pulled out her ukulele, and passed it to Kapuna Myrtle. Music would be the common bond. We will sing to the senators in the language of our people. These two Hawaiian Kapuna silently agreed. So Kapuna Hale and Kapuna Hilo sang. The songs were in the Hawaiian language, but the emotions they stirred were universal. They were songs of caring. These were songs of love. The two Kapuna could have been anyone's grandparents singing their folk songs in any language and still been able to convey this connection. Without speaking a political word, Kapunas Hale and Hilo had conveyed their message. We are important. Take care of us. Well, pandemonium erupted. Everyone in the Senate rose to their feet. The Kapuna delegation received a standing ovation. The policymakers of Washington, D.C. had been charmed. And the lobby was successful. The legislators allocated enough money to fund this valuable program for the following 10 years. This brave and humble grandmother from the sleepy little town of Waimanalo had come to Washington with a message and a prayer. Her message had been heard. Her prayer had been answered. Malama kekahi I kekahi. Take care of each other. Love each other. So as I see it, these stories that I've shared with you today are examples of love in deed. People sharing their love in deeds that they have chosen to perform. We can learn from the simplest acts of sharing the practice of spiritual wisdom. And so it is.